Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your participation in this webinar of the IMI project Adapt Smart. This is the project's first public webinar, and we thank you all for joining us today. My name is Dwayne Schultes, and I'll be moderating this webinar with 4 of the project's leads. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Hans-Georg Eichler, the Senior Medical Officer of the EMA, who's sitting directly to my right at the EMA offices. Good afternoon, Dr. Eichler.
Good afternoon, Dwayne.
We're joined by Solange Roux, the Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs and Policy at AstraZeneca, who's running one of the work packages. Hello, Solange.
Hello, Dwayne. Hello, everybody.
Thank you for joining us. I'm also joined here at the EMA by Jacqueline Bouvy, the Senior Scientific Advisor of NICE. Hello, Jacqueline.
Hello, good afternoon.
And we're also joined on the phone by Andre Brookman, who's at Ligature, who's also joining us on the phone. Good afternoon, Andre.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So before we get started, I just want to walk you through a couple of the tools. If you're having audio issues, we have provided 20 international dial-in phone numbers for you, so you can switch between computer audio and the phone audio just by clicking that little button there with the red circle on it. And then in the last half hour of the webinar, we will be taking questions from the audience. There is a question bar in your control panel. Please just push on that, and you can ask any questions that you'd like, and we will endeavor to answer them in the order that they are received. And now I will be handing the floor to Dr. Hans-Georg Eichler. Dr. Eichler, thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. And again, good afternoon, everybody. My task now is to give you a very high-level and quick overview of where our project stands. But before I do that, for the benefit of those of you who are not too familiar with the concept of MAPS and Adapt Smart, just a few words about what we try to do. MAPPS stands for Medicine's Adaptive Pathways to Patients, and it can be used synonymously with the term adaptive pathways that is probably more widely known. And MAPS seeks to foster access to beneficial treatments for the right patient group at the earliest appropriate time in the product lifespan and in a sustainable fashion. If you read a sentence like this, you might imagine that every single word of this has been turned over many times. So this is the product of an agreement of our entire consortium. And MAPS is a prospectively planned iterative approach to medicine's development and access pathways, and within the current regulatory framework, certainly in Europe. We do not seek to change European legislation in the pharmaceutical sector. And it is a lifespan approach, meaning that learning about a product is about the entire lifespan of this product. So much for MAPS. Now, the IMI Adapt Smart Consortium aims to facilitate and accelerate the availability of this MAPS idea, of this approach, to all healthcare stakeholders. And when I say that, it becomes clear that this has science and policy and political implications, and we will return to that in a minute. On that slide, you see all the public and private partners involved in the Adapt Smart Consortium. I understand from Dwayne that you will be able to see all these slides at leisure later on, so I will not dwell on these. Just to say, and this is also shown here, that we have almost all the major players in the healthcare ecosystem on board. This is the navigator group, that is the steering group of our consortium, and I'm only showing this again to illustrate that this is a multi-stakeholder consortium where all the important players are adequately represented. Now, what I want to do over the next few minutes is go over some of the achievements of the consortium to date. I'm not going to show you the results. This will be done by my colleagues who report on the individual work packages. I will then briefly discuss some issues and concerns and finally come to what I think is the current state of play of adaptive pathways. So to start this on a lighter note, you may have heard of the famous 3 Chinese curses, or maybe there are blessings or both. And in terms of achievement, I would say we had fantastic success in getting all of these. Certainly our project lives in interesting times. Certainly we have come to the attention of pretty much everybody. And we also, in terms of spreading our idea, have been very successful. So we have to some degree found what we were looking for. And again, this is a mixed curse and blessing. Now, on a more serious note, what have we achieved really? We have agreed on the scope and the goal of MAPS and of our project. And this is no small feat, given that we are a highly divergent consortium with highly divergent interests and starting positions. We have had success in getting some EU payers at least partly engaged. These were originally rather skeptical, but they say they are at least willing to listen, many of them. There is a lot of ex-EU geographical spread of the adaptive pathways idea. And I personally know that Canada, Australia, Japan are actively debating to what extent and how to bring that concept on board. The US is a very different healthcare environment, a very different system, so there our ideas are known and being debated. I wouldn't say it's too far to say that they were likely to adopt this, but maybe some components. And there is wide dissemination of the MAPS idea, and as I said before, with interesting consequences. And that brings me to the next point. So in this public debate about the adaptive pathways idea, we have come up against a number of concerns and issues that were raised partly by payers, partly by academic and consumer groups. And I will spend 1 or 2 slides on each of those. So the first, there was a general comment saying that this is a not well understood concept, there is lack of transparency. And our response to that is, yes, point taken. We agree. That is valid, and that is actually the very raison d'etre for our consortium. We're here to explain our ideas, to further elaborate on them, to refine them. And with regard to transparency, our line is, and we stick to that line very scrupulously, is that we are not bound by any mostly product-related confidentiality. We wish to be fully transparent, and everything we do in this consortium will be in the public domain. And we hope this is a key asset and also a selling point for an inclusive public-private partnership like ours, full transparency. I now come to the specific concerns about adaptive pathways. There are voices that say, and you have a quote at the top of that slide, well, this whole thing about early access isn't really worth it because new drugs that come to market either have no added therapeutic value or at best offer marginal improvements. So our response to that is we disagree. There are many patients who have a short window, a treatment window of opportunity right now that closes soon, and for them, time is of critical importance. But we acknowledge that this critical timing issue is only relevant, A, for conditions that have a serious impact on quality of life and or are life-shortening or debilitating. So we're talking about a real unmet medical need, and this is an important point we emphasize, and when we're talking about a drug that holds a credible promise of moving the needle for a patient, and that means an acceptably high probability of a relevant effect size. And that is a key message that we wish to carry. Another critical point that we heard was, well, MAPS will lower the evidence standards. It will allow poorly studied drugs on the market. Patients will be at risk. Again, we disagree, and it's important that we spread this message. The benefit risk of a drug that we allow on the market must be positive, but here comes the important point, for the treatment eligible population. And that may be a very small population with high unmet need. It may not be a blockbuster population. And what is certainly true, there is an initially acceptable uncertainty for every patient group that has always been there, and we want to reduce that uncertainty as fast as is practical. So we would say, in the end, we hope to know more about a particular drug than we did in the past when all the focus was only on the pre-licensing phase. There is an issue about real-world data versus randomized controlled trials, and it is not a secret that this is a bit of a cultural debate here. And there are voices who say MAP seeks to downgrade RCTs, that is randomized control trials, and replace them with what many see as lower value, so-called real-world data type information. And they say, well, then we will have unreliable information about new drugs. And again, we would disagree with that criticism, because we totally acknowledge that RCTs are the methodology with the highest internal validity, but for efficient increase of knowledge, and I could also say decrease of uncertainty as I did in the last slide, we need to embrace, for practical reasons, the full evidence spectrum. So we see real-world data to complement rather than replace RCTs. There isn't a competition. It's the right study type for the right question. Then there is a criticism that about promises and compliance by industry. Some people would say, well, in theory, this idea that you allow a drug on market based on admittedly limited evidence, but with the prospect of learning more, that's attractive. That is, of course, logical, but companies will not honor their post-marketing commitments. And there were studies that had not been done or delayed by sponsors. And they also say that it may turn out that a product is less effective or safe than initially assumed. What then would a payer do when they're locked into paying a high price for such a product? So our response to this is more nuanced. We disagree somewhat. Yes, in the past, some promised post-marketing studies were not delivered, and there are studies to show that. They're not wrong, but the world has changed. And we analyzed at the EMA whether our post-marketing requirements are honored. And the picture we see is reassuring. The vast majority of these studies that have been promised will be delivered, admittedly often delayed. That has practical reasons. And don't forget that most of the pre-agreed post-marketing commitments are legally binding. With regard to payers, again, we acknowledge their issue, but we believe that the issue can be addressed prospectively by appropriate agreements between sponsors and payers that anticipate such information that may be less favorable than expected about a particular product. And then there is the issue of on-market utilization. MAPS foresees, as I said earlier, timely authorization and reimbursement of a product for a well-defined patient population. That may be a small population, and then subsequently you can widen that. And some critics say, well, nice in theory will not fly in practice because we will see off-label prescribing, and therefore the drug will be used widely with budget impact and risk problems that are not foreseen by the concept. Now, is this true? Well, our response here is again nuanced. We acknowledge that issue, and we acknowledge that across Europe, different healthcare environments may be differently positioned to address that concern, some better than others. That depends on national legislation. But regulators can provide some steer on appropriate prescribing, and payer actions can also be helpful. But again, as I said, we acknowledge heterogeneity across Europe. And then, of course, right incentives can be in place for companies to help ensure appropriate prescribing. So far, the issues and the criticisms that we heard and our response to those. Now, lastly, let me address the state of play. Where do I think, and this is my personal judgment, that the adaptive pathways idea stands, that the work of our consortium stands? First, let me remind you of what I had already shown you at the beginning of this. The Adapt Smart Consortium aims to facilitate and accelerate the availability of the MAPS idea. And as I said, that has science, policy, and political implications, which logic dictates requires that it is acceptable, these ideas, politically, societally, and that these ideas are practically feasible. So we need the infrastructure, the processes, the methodologies. So how are we doing? What I'm showing you on this slide is the MAPS top component parts, and I would argue that the whole adaptive pathways idea is nothing but an intelligent composition and combination of these component parts that are listed here. And what I want to do is now attempt to say where are we standing, both in terms of acceptability and feasibility, and I will do that on a 5-point scale, where 5 of these green ticks means we have achieved maximum success. Either this is perfectly acceptable or perfectly feasible. So let's start with the first component part. We focus on high unmet needs subpopulations and products that will likely to have a major impact. Well, that concept and idea is widely acceptable. I've never heard anybody disagree with the general idea. Is it feasible to discern those situations that have high unmet need versus more trivial indications? I guess so as well. So we're doing quite good here. And we probably are reasonably good, if not perfect, in finding out those products that have the highest promise of addressing that unmet need. So we're doing quite well on this. How about reducing uncertainty fast, about reacting to incoming data? This is the idea of iterative development, of rapid cycle analysis, to make sure that patients are safe and that we deliver the best possible healthcare. Again, the idea is broadly accepted. Feasibility is probably less high on that scale because we have issues with infrastructure, data, how fast can we take decisions, etc. Then the MAPS idea says you pre-plan across the whole lifespan of the product, not just for the pre-licensing space. You already in the very beginning say, what will you do once the product is on the market? How will you steer prescribing, etc.? What additional data will you generate? And here again, most people would agree that yes, this is a good idea. Of course it is, because learning doesn't stop on the day of market access. But again, the feasibility may have issues for the same reasons that I described earlier. The next one is use the entire toolbox for knowledge generation. And that includes both randomized controlled trials and non-randomized trials, or what some people call real-world data. And interestingly here, the acceptability is not so great because there is a school of thought that I described earlier that says non-randomized data, so-called real-world data, isn't really credible. So here we have an acceptability issue, and that is my personal judgment. I would say the feasibility of doing such studies and of making inference based on such studies is not so bad because we have made great progress over the past years in data generation, but also in analytic methodology to avoid and address bias. Another element of the adaptive pathways idea is we want to manage on-market utilization. And here again, many people would say, yeah, in principle, this is a good idea. Not everybody is on board because some prescribers may say, look, I'm the best judge of who I prescribe to. But the acceptability is not the issue. The real issue is the feasibility. How can you, in a real world, across Europe, ensure that those patients who should get the drug will get it and those who should not get it? So here is work to be done. Another element is leverage multi-stakeholder, and I would add multi-decision maker collaboration. That means bring in not just the regulator, but also HTA bodies, payers, patients, prescribers, and discuss and plan from the beginning the evidence generation and licensing pathway and reimbursement pathway. Everybody agrees again that yes, we should have multi-stakeholder collaboration. We should work together. No one disagrees with that really. But in practice, there are hurdles. There are issues of resources. There are issues of willingness to come to the table. And lastly, can we address sustainability of the healthcare system? And that means both sustainability of the research enterprise and the payer's budget. And here, as you would expect, because we have non-aligned interests, so there isn't a single acceptable pathway, and we have also issues with regards to feasibility. Again, work to be done. So if you look at that table, and you may or may not share my value judgments and how many ticks I gave to each of these, but I think we can all agree on the last slide, which is this. So where do we stand? And I think everybody on this call can interpret that picture for themselves. The glass is half full, but we still have to do some work. And with that, I hand back to Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eichler. As I mentioned earlier, we will be taking questions from all of the panelists from the audience as we move forward. We should have about a half hour at the end. But we do want to get some short overviews from the various work packages. So now I turn to Solange Roux for work package 1. Solange, are you with us?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Dwayne.
Fantastic, Solange. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is definitely a nice opportunity to report back on the work which has been done within work package 1, and of course the work which remains to be done. Next one. So work package 1 is all about the evidence to be generated to support a MAPS product throughout its life cycle. In other words, what could be done in order to identify tools and methods that could help generate this evidence. In order to achieve our objectives and as per the project predefined plan, in a joint effort, public and private partners of the consortium have to review the existing European projects, whether IMI or non-IMI projects, and more specifically those which could generate tools and methods of interest for MAPS. As a result of the review, a gap analysis has to be performed to ultimately help provide recommendation for future research. Next one. Last year, we thus focused on IMI projects developed under the umbrella of the Innovative Medicine Initiative. And there were 60 projects in total at the time we started the review. And based on a well-defined methodology, 32 mature projects were finally selected for an in-depth review. And it should be reminded, though, that none of these projects were designed initially with MAPS in mind. And for our project, this reverse engineering has been a real challenge. Nevertheless, with the review, we have been able to identify tools and methods of interest and relevant to MAPS, such as specific biomarkers or endpoints, patient-reported outcomes, or specific criteria that could help select a well-defined target population. As a result of this review, a report was drafted, which includes an initial gap analysis and work to be done to fully develop and qualify those tools and methods for a proper use in a MAPS project. Clearly, this represents the first step towards recommendation for future research. Next one. So now moving forward, what is our plan for the last remaining months since the project at Smart is due to finish by the end of this year? Initially, we were quite ambitious and the scope of our work was quite broad. This is the reason why we decided to revisit our plan and have a narrower focus for the second stage of our review in order to produce actionable research recommendation. Next one. We've then decided to revisit the review of IMI projects started last year and consider the IMI projects which have matured in the meantime and as depicted on the slide currently. We will be using the same methodology that we used for the first review round, And we will make sure to leverage as well the work that is being done at the IMI with regard to registries. Next one. In parallel of this review, our research will focus on 3 main topics which were identified as priority back in January at the General Assembly of the project, and which was approved by the consortium, meaning single-arm studies, indirect comparison and observational studies, and payer evidence requirements. This activity will be specifically led by Jacqueline. Jacqueline will be one of our panelists later on, in this presentation, and of course with the support of the consortium members. For each of these topics, it is expected that a 3 to 4 page document with a recommendation will be delivered. They should identify key issues and of course specific areas for future IMI research. Next one. So in summary, at the end of this year, final expected outputs for work package 1 are to deliver a gap analysis and subsequent research recommendation, which would need, of course, to receive the support of all the stakeholders. Research project will be proposed to IMI offices. The report, which was released last January, will be, of course, further updated. And this is where we are at the moment. These are our future activities. And prior to hand over to André for reporting back on work package 2 activities, I'd like to acknowledge the work done by the work package 1 consortium members, and more specifically by my co-chairs, Aileen of CASME, Sarah Garner and Jacqueline Bouvy of NICE, and also Joao Duarte. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solange. And we will now move to work package 2 with André. André, are you on the phone with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic, André. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Work package 2 is involved in designing the MAPS pathway, and I'd like to report back to you about 2 parts we have completed, and I will show you the main results. May I have the next slide, please? We completed a discussion paper on the engagement criteria for MAPS, and that is a framework of questions addressed by all stakeholders involved when a MAPS pathway is considered for a given medicinal product. And as said before also by Hans-Georg, it does not mean that every new chemical entity will enter this adaptive pathway. It should be a product intended for a target population with a high medical need as defined by Hans-Georg, and it's very important that the product should promise to address that medical need. It should be a true transformative product. Another important question to be addressed is, can a development plan be proposed, developed and implemented and agreed in such a way that during each phase, during the lifespan, the decision makers are assured that data can be generated with regard to the issues at stake. So you should not wait till your first market authorization before thinking about what needs to be done in order to reduce uncertainty. So you have to have a holistic view on how a development plan should look like, and you should detail it depending on the phase of your development. But at least you should have a lifespan approach to this development plan. Another important aspect is addressing the tools needed to use in practice, that the product is used in an appropriate way. It's not only a prescription only, but we should also look at other tools to ensure that the right patient group is targeted. Another item which is important, especially from the payer's perspective, and to avoid that the payers is subsidizing the development of a product, is that if there is a transformative product, is there also in an early stage agreement on what will we do if this product underperforms? And Jacqueline might go into detail when discussing this. Another aspect also addressed by Hans-Georg is that there should be sufficient commitment and resources from all relevant stakeholders to ensure successful interaction. Well, for some stakeholders like the regulators, they have already some processes in place to adapt to this new environment, but in the other sectors like the HCA and payers, they don't have always the resources needed to do the work, and they don't have yet the political commitment to do so as well. And a minor issue, but it needs to be addressed, is when you have a earlier access to the market, we should also ensure that pharmaceutical development is at such a stage that we can provide to the patients a consistent product with sufficient lifespan. The next slide, please. Then we have done some work on how such a pathway could look like, and as said before, we are trying to implement MAPS pathway within the current framework, and we are not there to create new legal framework. So we should do it within the current situation. And the mandates of the decision makers at the European level and the national level are and will be unchanged. And we will make use of the existing tools like scientific advice, registries where needed. And the most important item for this MAPS pathway is that there is a coordinated dialogue with the relevant stakeholders and a formal engagement of these stakeholders to look at and assess this development plan at certain time points. And if you look at the next slide, there you can see in a figure how this process could look like. It is a crowded slide. On the right-hand panel, right side, you see the involved stakeholders with their symbols, patient representatives, healthcare professionals, EU regulatory network, the pricing and reimbursement authorities at the national level, the medicine developers, and we envisage a project manager at a certain stage. And when you look at the panel from discovery to post-authorization, well, the development is more or less within the current paradigm of development with discovery, preclinical, then the stage where you create preliminary evidence and which will be reviewed and then results in an initial marketing authorization with subsequent additional data generation and assessment. And when you look at the upper part of this slide, you see the decision moments for the stakeholders. We have a development assessment that is a prerogative still of the medicines developer. Then we have the authorization by the regulators, then the appraisal and subsequent decision on the price and the reimbursement, then the regulatory post-authorization decisions, and then based on the evidence generation in the post-authorization phase, adjustment on the pricing and reimbursement. And when you look at the lower part of the panel, there we envisage that at an early stage, we think somewhere from between preclinical and getting the first evidence in, a coordinated dialogue to ensure that we have a holistic approach to the development. So not only fulfilling the requirements of the regulators, but also adapting to the needs of the HCA bodies and the pricing and reimbursement agencies. And this is a iterative process. At certain time points during the process, This will be repeated based on the evidence generated. And at the last slide, you can see the whole concept is the whole vehicle for driving this this process will be what we call a iterative development plan, which means that from the initial stage you have a product development plan, and you adapt that through multi-stakeholder engagement, and this evidence generation plan should address the critical questions not only from the regulators but also to support subsequent pricing and reimbursement decisions at the national level, and also reducing the uncertainty in the post-marketing phase and the support of subsequent indications. So this is what we have done as concrete products, and I will give the floor to Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Andre. Just to repeat, we have some questions coming in. After Jacqueline's presentation, we will be taking questions. Please use the question bar in your control panel on the desktop, and we will certainly get to your questions. So with that, I now hand over to Jacqueline.
Yes, thanks, Wayne. As a last presentation in this webinar, I will talk briefly about some of the work we've done as part of work package 3, which is a large work package with lots of interesting work streams on topics related to decision-making, sustainability, and their implications. So the work that I'm talking about was revolved around identifying the availability and suitability of managed entry agreements in the context of adaptive pathways. And I have to acknowledge the contribution of Claudine Sapid from Roche here, who was a co-lead for some of this work. So we set out to explore the experiences of different key healthcare system stakeholders, including payers, agencies for health technology assessment, as well as manufacturers, their experiences with managed entry agreements in recent years. And we define a managed entry agreement as any type of arrangement between a manufacturer and a payer provider that enables access to a health technology. So these can have different types, shapes, and forms. Financial arrangements are very common, so those would be confidential discounts and rebates or volume caps, for example. But especially in the context of adaptive pathways, we would expect that possible managed entry agreements might also involve additional data collection. So we wanted to see what the experiences of these different stakeholders were with these types of arrangements to identify whether certain models might be able to facilitate the managed introduction of an adaptive pathways product. Because the situation that we're faced with within the European system is that we have a European marketing authorization that can be granted by regulatory agencies when there's sufficient evidence of the product's quality, safety, and efficacy. But we have national healthcare systems that then, in the context of a publicly funded healthcare system, have to decide whether or not a product should be made available in the context of such a publicly funded healthcare system to patients. And questions that they ask differ from country to country, but usually they revolve around how well does a product work compared to what's already available to patients. And in different questions, different countries, the question whether or not a product provides value for money is also an important consideration. And also, we know that all these different countries have different methods and processes in how they determine this and what type of evidence they require. They will usually be interested in relative effectiveness of a drug, sometimes cost effectiveness, and payers will be concerned with affordability and budget impact of products as well. Now, we have done this work in the last year. There's a report on the AdaptSmart website that contains a lot more information, and we're finalizing a paper that hopefully will be published in the near future as well, that will contain more information. But I've very briefly summarized some of the key findings and recommendations. So in thinking about what the managed introduction of an adaptive pathways product might look like, we found that in speaking to HTA bodies and payers that there's only support for, which is also something that Andreas mentioned in discussing the engagement criteria, for products that truly offer substantial added benefits and address unmet medical needs. And we also know, this must not come as a surprise to many, that because pricing and reimbursement are national competence, that any type of model for managed introduction should be aligned with national processes, and these processes differ from country to country. So that means that we don't really have a one-size-fits-all managed entry agreement model available that would be applicable to any type of adaptive pathway product. But although that is the case, we have also identified certain opportunities. And what became quite clear is that there is room for improving the alignment of data collection for regulatory as well as potentially for HTA purposes. If a product will have to collect safety data in a real-world setting, it might be able to see if that could also facilitate collecting data for HTA for payer purposes. And also what we see is that especially the adaptive pathway process, where there's early engagement with downstream stakeholders, could also facilitate better coordination of multi-country data collection efforts when HTA agencies, for example, or payers would be aware of the fact that data, certain data would be collected not just in one country but in several countries simultaneously, that might relate to more efficient evidence generation, and there are definitely there's definitely room for improvements there, and also the scope to explore how we could better facilitate these types of efforts. I will leave it at that, but please refer back to the website where more information about this work can be found. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. So we've got about 20 minutes here for some Q&A. We've had a few questions come in. One of the things I just like to ask quickly, we've had several people mention that there should be a focus in MAPS on transformative products. That phrase has been used by several of you. Is there some sort of process to define what would be transformative aside from the WHO's unmet medical need, or is that enough? What would we be looking for the definition of what is a transforming product that would then fit under the criteria of MAPS?
I think, yeah, very briefly, I think that I'm not sure what exactly that would entail, but it's more than just an addressing an unmet medical need. So it would be something like an unmet medical need plus. There needs to be a reasonable expectation of a substantial added benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So from a regulator to support that, what we see is at the early stages, there is a likely effect size. So will a product improve longevity by 1 week, 1 month, or 1 year?
Mm-hmm.
And transformative would mean that the effect size is of such sufficient, is so big that it really makes a difference in a patient's lives. That's one. And the second is, and that is separate, is orthogonal to the effect size, is the probability of that materializing in subsequent studies. Because at the beginning we only have early data, which is a promise. And the third is, well, how many patients will realize that effect size? So what is the number needed to treat? All of this combines into a product either being transformative or less so.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers the question.
That's fine. And Andre, do you have any expansion on that from your opinion as a former HTA?
No, not former HTA. I was a former regulator, so I subscribe to what Hans Geer said, and it's always it's a difficult judgment because you have to decide initially on just a few preclinical and perhaps some early clinical studies. So it remains a judgment call, but under the perspective that it is an ongoing process and a judgment can be made.
Thank you. Again, we have some questions coming in. Please, folks on the webinar, come in with your questions on the question bar. We're going to start answering those now. We have a question here from Paul Robinson. Thank you for your question, Paul. With reimbursement a national competency and control of prescribing and hence off-label prescribing also a national competency, is there a risk that this makes promising medicines available to some EU patients but not to others? Not a problem for something like diabetes, but potentially a big problem if it's a promising medicine for an unmet need. This again develops on that. Yeah, completely agree. Jackie, yes. Do you?
Yes.
In a word, yes. Solange, do you have any expansion on that you would like to say from an industry rep about unequal prescription here potentially under the pathway?
Yes, sure. This is a very good question, and of course, this is a question which has been debated for quite a long time, and clearly, this is definitely the topic we have debated also recently among the consortium members. So we should hopefully have some more clear idea moving forward. Or at least providing recommendation on how moving forward and how to clarify this issue.
That's fine. I guess another question then following up on this is we've had several mentions of the heterogeneous nature of HTA in the member states. There are several initiatives, or there are several discussions around trying to unify HTA processes. First off, do you think MAPS would benefit from a unified HTA process? And then secondly, we are here in the UK, given the political realities right now, is this politically possible to unify HTA? Who wants to take a crack at that? Everyone jump in at once, please.
I will not talk about the UK, that is a separate political issue. But we all know that the assessment, let's go back to the previous question. Why do we have different access to products? I think there has one of two sources. One is there is genuinely different purchasing power across Europe. And this is the case now. And even if MAX is greatly successful, this will not address this problem. So we have to see what MAPS can do and what it cannot do. So the differential purchasing power is beyond our reach. But could we help harmonize the different assessment, which is different? Because different people or groups can assess a product and can come to different value conclusions. Do we hope that we can help and support a unified or harmonized assessment? And the answer is absolutely yes. We're hoping to get people around a table from different EU member states early on say, what do we need to show to enable your value assessment? And we think that this process will help drive harmonization in future. So I think we want to help that process of harmonization, and MAPS would be greatly aided if we had more harmonization of HTA assessment across Europe.
Thank you. There's a question here from Christoph Thalman. Is regular patient involvement foreseen in the decision of what makes a major difference to a patient's life, obviously for unmet medical need? So patient engagement in the context of MAPS going forward broadly. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that that's an answer that a question that can be answered without patient involvement. So that's a very big yes.
And Andre, from the Dutch perspective, is that a similar situation from the feedback you're receiving?
Well, this is not a Dutch perspective. I think it is a European perspective, and we have the EPF on board and Eurorders, and I think they have a heavy say in how patients should be involved, and there are advocates that patients should be more involved in the whole of processes.
That's great. We've got a question here, Andre, about one of your slides, so I'm just going to pull that up, if you don't mind. And I believe it's the illustration slide here. So let me just pull that up just so we have clarity here. What is the title of the illustration in the next to last slide of Mr. Brookman's presentation? Which step is the most critical step in this illustration? Well, that's for you, Andre.
Well, I think the as I said before, I think the most critical step is to get all stakeholders on board at the decision point. So the first stage, when you look at the left bottom slide, the first commitment engagement moment to start off is very important, because there you discuss and agree upon the development plan and also the feasibility post initial approval to collect additional evidence and how you can guide the product to the right patient group and under which conditions the product could be put on the market. Of course, with some uncertainties, and that has to be filled in with additional evidence to be generated. So I think the critical point is, can we get commitment and involvement of all stakeholders during the whole of the process? Because otherwise we remain working in silos and we should try to make a more smooth and seamless pathway to get the product early to their patient.
That's great, thank you. Anything to add here? No, we're fine.
If I may, Duane.
Yes, please, Solange, go ahead.
Yeah. I will add that on top of, having, the necessary preliminary evidence, and to get the support, of all the stakeholders, the commitment, of everybody at an early stage, it will be quite important as well as, a pre-planned milestone to, of course, verify, the assumption, and while, evidence is being generated, whether or not we are still on the right track. So meaning that, it's forward thinking, and at the same time, reassessing, while data is generated, whether or not we are still on track. So this is very key, for the concept.
No, it's a very good point. Thank you. And we'd like to thank Emery Yarsi for that question. Thank you very much. And again, the questions are coming in fast and furious now. We have a question from Inra Chen. Given the heterogeneity of the assessment methods used by various nationals in assessing value of a product, can the panel comment on how divergent these outcomes are across the EU and how they relate to gaps identified within the MAPS pathway? So how is MAPS dealing with the gaps that are instituted by the various assessment authorities? Who wants to take a crack at that? Jackie.
Well, yes, I think that we acknowledge that there are differences in that, yes, in how these processes work at the national level, and that is something that will need to be addressed. I don't think that it is realistic to expect that a MAPS pathway would make any changes to that situation. I think that what MAPS offers, though, is that it has this early engagement component, which means that you can start discussions about what those evidence requirements are, even if they might differ from country to country, much earlier than if you would look at a traditional or normal development pathway. So it offers the opportunity to engage with the different HTA bodies and potentially payers much earlier on. So that's a clear opportunity, I think, that the MAPS pathway offers over a normal development pathway.
And Professor Eichler, from the EMA's perspective, do you see the closer relation with HTA is beneficial to the decision here in the licensing, and that sort of discussion? Do you see that as a key part of this? Or?
So the big advantage that we already see materializing through our engagement with the HTA bodies, and there are several across Europe with whom we have regular contact and interaction, is that by and large we can agree on a set of data that a development plan should deliver, so that at the end, when the product comes to market, both the regulator and the various HTA bodies can say, all right, we have the information that we need to have. That is not the same as saying we all come to the same conclusion, but at least we can agree up front on what we will require. To give you an example, we very often heard from HTA bodies, we want more patient-reported outcomes that relate to quality of life. And regulators have had different preferences. So that is the type of information that we can now successfully bridge. And we hope that this will be further reinforced through the interactions in the MAPS pathway.
Great, thank you. A comment here from Mark Dooms. Belgium has proposed a national list of unmet medical needs for rare diseases. That's a very good point. Thank you, Mark, for that comment. That is correct. That is currently under negotiation. Comment here from Jacqueline Bowman. Hello, Jacqueline. Hope you're well. Thank you for listening. How do you ensure the involvement of the patient is meaningful, and how will you measure this? So how do we hardwire quality patient engagement into the MAPS process? That's a very good question. Andre, that sort of falls into your purview. How is that working in your work package?
Well, as said before, patients are involved in ADAPT Smart, and they're also involved at the IMI level already in certain processes. So I expect also, because of these initiatives and other initiatives under IMI, that the patients will get to the stage and get more involved. And as said before, this is done within the current framework, so it is without any legislative changes. So it is up to all stakeholders to agree upon that the patients will be sitting on the table during the process and during the different decision moments.
That's great. Thank you. We're almost out of time, so I'm just going to ask one final question. If you had one choice of one objective you'd like to see delivered in the final 8 months of ADAPT Smart, what would you like that to be? So I will start with you, Solange. What one key deliverable would you like to see delivered or finalized between now and December 31st when the project wraps?
This is a very good question, and let's remain optimistic. First, of course, we need to finalize, the project. Whether or not, we will be able, to finalize everything by the end of the year. This is, of course, still to be seen. But clearly, we do hope that in addition to recommendation for future research, we will be able, to put in practice, all the good discussion we have had so far in order to provide, reassurance with regard to the concept itself, its viability, and the fact that we can work together in order to deliver, what was the main objective of this project.
Thank you. Andre, what would be your key deliverable between now and December 31st?
Well, I think that is not my deliverable. I think it is very important to involve our colleagues from the Eastern European countries. There's now too much focused on the Western European countries, and we like to have involvement of stakeholders from the Eastern European countries as well. And that's one of our ideas to be more active and proactive towards these countries.
Thank you. Jacqueline, what would you like?
I think that what we've identified in the last year is that there still is a lot of work that needs to be done, especially thinking about the HTA and payer components of adaptive pathways. We have seen an EMA pilot that has piloted the adaptive pathways concept, but none of these products have actually entered the market yet. So if we can identify kind of the key components that still need to be addressed from the HTA and payer perspective and find some consensus on what those might be and how to take those forward, I think that would be a big achievement for us.
And Professor Eichler, Project Director, what would be your key deliverable? What would you like to see?
So there are many specific deliverables, but if you ask me what is my one goal...
I'm limiting you to one, sir.
Okay, not a problem. Let's go back to basics. Why did we come up with the whole adaptive pathways idea? Because we recognize there is a conundrum between timely access and information. So some people call that evidence versus access. Now, what I'm hoping that by the end of this year is that we have broad in principle agreement among all the decision makers that the MAPS concept is an intelligent and appropriate way to address this conundrum. and that therefore there is a willingness to continue refining it.
That's great. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you all. Andre, Solange, goodbye. Thank you for your participation. Jacqueline, Hans-Georg here next to me, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. This concludes our webinar. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.